Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. In recent weeks, a proposal by Minister Azalina Othman Said to raise Malaysia's retirement age from 60 to 65 has reignited national debate. Now, while the Prime Minister himself has called for a careful study of the idea, the backlash online was swift, with many Malaysians voicing fears about youth career progression and delayed rest for those past 60, as well as questioning government motives. But behind that real outrage is a real policy dilemma. Malaysia is aging rapidly. We are set to become an aged nation in 15 years. So today we're going to go behind the headlines and ask what raising the retirement age could actually mean for Malaysian society. And if we do implement such a policy, how should it be designed with fairness, dignity, and choice at the center of it? So joining me on the show now is Chai Sen Tyng, who is a Senior Research Officer at UPM's Malaysia Research Institute on Aging, better known as MyAgeing. Chai, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get into the kind of current discourse around raising the retirement age, I'm hoping that you can help us first think through what the social purpose of retirement is. What do you think the retirement age was actually meant to achieve in society?
Thank you, Melissa. I think this is really what we consider a cyclical issue. I mean, it comes up all the time, from time to time, and the response is pretty predictable by now. But it's a good place to start, as we like to figure out, where does all this retirement nonsense came from, right? I mean, there's really no retirement age before what we call formal sector economies. I mean, even in less developed countries, they have a very high labor force participation rate for senior citizens, simply because when you are in agricultural sector or you are in the informal sector, you don't really have a retirement age. And in fact, the interesting part about our country, the Employment Act actually does not specify a retirement age, actually. So that's the reason why the Minimum Retirement Age Act, when it was introduced in 2012, spells out clearly that it is a minimum, not a maximum or a mandatory kind of requirement. So it means that the whole purpose is actually to make sure that our employers keep their workers around at least till the age of 60. Of course, personal preferences and health notwithstanding, you can quit anytime you like. Nobody's stopping you from that. And since we did not manage to harmonize EPF withdrawal ages with retirement age, you can still withdraw all your savings at the age of 55. So I think before we proceed any further, it's very useful to understand where does these policies come from and the purpose. And unfortunately, rather, although we actually set the minimum retirement age to be 60 years old in 2012, the percentage of workforce, the older persons or older workers in the workforce has remained stagnant. The impact of the law back in 2012 probably added less than 10 percentage points. So let's say, for example, before 2012, the labor force participation rate of those aged 55 to 59 is about, say, maybe 12-15%. And today, it's actually no more than 20% as well. So it didn't really significantly increase. It's not like when the government introduced a new threshold, the labor force participation rate of older workers doubled or tripled. It did not happen.
Right. Is that largely because older workers themselves do not want to stay employed longer? I'm just wondering where this debate is coming from in terms of the retirement age. I'm just wondering whether this is really driven by fiscal sustainability. Economic planners are thinking about this rather than individuals.
I think maybe if they are talking about the civil service, probably, but it's not a sure estimation, because when you keep them longer in the civil service, because the way the civil service pension is calculated is based on last drawn salaries. So if you give them another 5 years, that pension burden might go up. So I think that one is a separate argument. But in terms of fiscal policy, for private sector workers, at least, since we didn't do any adjustments to EPF, I do not believe there's actually any fiscal burden on the government for pensions. So for the private sector, so the only thing really it could be is the linkages to social welfare benefits, social welfare, and also what we call concessions in the market. Probably, like for example, eligibility for Bantuan Warga Emas, the cash transfer programs. Maybe the threshold might be moved to 65, or if we are going to introduce some schemes, SARA or any of the Sumbangan Asas Tunai Rahma or whatsoever, maybe the senior citizen definition will then be moved to 65.
Right.
So,
Chai, how are you interpreting that data when you said that there's really no big difference in the labor force participation of those over 50? How are you interpreting those figures?
I think the good news of the 2012 law was that it stopped the decline, because previously the data trend kept showing that the labor force participation rate of older persons kept falling steadily in the past 2 to 3 decades. That's expected because our previous retirement age was 55. And a lot of company did not follow suit when the government set the mandatory retirement age for civil servants at 60. Hence the reason for the enactment. But what happened, we noticed, is that our employers and employees, both sides, are really not entirely keen. Maybe because there's high turnover in the market, there is a steady flow of foreign and younger workers entering the labor market. But statistically speaking, from a demographic point of view, the population under 18 or under 20 rather has been declining. And that's a fact. The number is actually shrinking. If the younger ages you go, the greater the decrease. And that is why in countries like Korea and Japan, on an annual basis, they keep announcing that there are schools that have zero new enrollments. We are not at that stage yet, of course, but it is declining. So you can say that from a demographic view, the number of younger workers entering the workforce is declining. Maybe delayed also because there are better educational opportunities. The peak used to be 20 to 25. The peak now is 25 to 29 because maybe everyone has a chance to go to university. So their delay of entry into the workforce is also expected. So I believe these are the factors. These are the considerations. So
Okay.
I think that's where we are at now.
Right. So if the government is studying this matter of raising the retirement ceiling, what guardrails do you think needs to be in place to not just protect the well-being of workers across the lifespan, but also, you mentioned earlier, it seems that both employers and employees don't seem to be too keen on it. So how do we make sure that this is a well-designed policy?
Yeah, I think that's where the policy options come in. It's not just increasing the retirement age indefinitely. The last time we did it was in 2012, right? I mean, if you study the impact and the outcome, we realized that there's still some stumbling block, in terms of getting more elderly to stay in the workforce. So rather than trying to increase the retirement age again, maybe we can have something like what we call the Reemployment Act, or something what we say as a gradual retirement or phased retirement. And that was being proposed by ISIS as well. So I think Singapore has done it. I mean, Japan has done it. The whole idea here is to get both the workers and the employers get used to this idea that, I don't wake up at the age of 60 and then turn into a totally different person, right? I mean, I don't go into my birthday and I wake up tomorrow at a whole new threshold. I suddenly lost the ability to walk or lost the ability to work. So this is the idea here, that trying to keep them in the job market, but at the same time addressing problems that cause their inability to perform in later ages. You know, once you reach the age of 40 or 50, a lot of older adult workers lose the opportunity for training, reskilling, upskilling, and a lot of scholarships and also training opportunities are denied to them. And then at the same time, we said, oh, these older workers, they cannot catch up or whatsoever. So overseas, they have these terms called multi-generational workforce. How do you get, as the workforce gets a little bit longer in retirement ages, people live longer, how do we make sure that, there's these gaps between the generations can be addressed? And how do we make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to catch up, and if they can and if they are able. So I would say that yes, we don't have to keep going the increasing the mandatory or minimum retirement age route. We can do what we call a Reemployment Act, give better training opportunities to older workers. I think these are the key things that can be done. Yeah.
Can I get you to expand on that? Why would a Reemployment Act be a better option than raising the retirement age? What are the pros and cons of going one way or the other?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of Reemployment Act, especially the one that was implemented in Singapore, takes a tripartite approach. They have this committee where they actually discuss, the basic idea of the Reemployment Act is that when you reach the age of retirement, let's say 60, your current employer has an obligation to offer you some position. It might be a different job, different pay, and you might have to. You're given a chance to actually stay in the same company, maybe in a different position, maybe at a different pay scale, but this is something that has to be done, in the first basis. The worker can refuse. They can say, oh no, I had enough, I just want to retire, and we can allow that. There's no issue here. But the committee works in a way that they try and see what industry is suitable for this kind of re-employment arrangement, because not all industry will be able to fulfill this kind of re-employment, a gradual or phase retirement. And it also prevents some employers from lowballing their workers. Maybe they want them, but just because there's a Reemployment Act, they actually try to make them work at a much lower pay. So these are some of the considerations that we can have.
Yeah, fantastic. Would that work for both private sector and the civil service and public sector as well?
This is the trick. I'm not too sure flexi work works very well for public sector. I have yet to see whether the contractual, we have that in the civil service. We call it contracts after your retirement. But I think the bigger debate with civil servants is actually to make sure that if you accept some of these job contracts, your pension, would it run in parallel? Then technically you are drawing two salaries, right? So these are the more nuanced details that has to be discussed, alongside with private sector pension reforms. The days of getting a lump sum payout is also over, I think, because it just paints a very big target on the back of our retirees. So everybody knows at the age of 55, you're going to be coming to money, and then you don't even have an incentive to work anymore because we didn't align these differences. So I think, yes, we need more discussions on these issues, but at the same time, we also need a more open and tolerance in listening and accepting ideas, because Malaysians are notorious for, I don't want that, and then they immediately jump to the other end and say, why are you doing this? But I think we can and we should discuss it, because it's all in the benefit of the workers. And also we must not victimize the employers who might genuinely feel that, why should I be saddled with this older worker for another 5 years or 3 years or whatsoever? But let's look at it this way. If our employment is purely based on performance, based on productivity, then it's not an issue about seniority, right? So I think the elderly themselves would feel relieved that I still want to work, but maybe I don't want 9 to 5 and overtime, and I want to take a more laid back approach. This is where organizations can think about, how can I reposition this asset and see how we can best make use of his experience and abilities.
Yeah. Chai, thank you so much for giving us something to consider, then reconsider. I appreciate your time. Chai Sen Tyng there from MyAgeing at UPM. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more on this topic. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the proposal to raise Malaysia's retirement age from 60 to 65. And of course, this has sparked fierce online backlash. But joining me now to help us consider this issue with more nuance is Dr Amjad Rabi, who's a social security economist with Universiti Malaya's Social Wellbeing Research Centre. Amjad, thank you so much for being on the show with me. A lot of the current discourse about raising the retirement age focuses a lot on kind of the government's fiscal sustainability. It always talks about it in terms of labour productivity for the economy. But because you are a social and human security development economist, I'm curious to know how you come at it. How do you look at it from a life course and longevity standpoint?
Thank you very much, Melissa, for having me. And I'm glad that you started with this question, because we tend to focus so much on, as you mentioned, on sustainability, on productivity, like the hard language. But at the end of the day, it is also psychological situation. Many people, they see themselves through what they do. Work define who we are. And when you retire at quite relatively young age, because now 60 is, you see people are very healthy and they can work for many years. Their cognitive abilities is still very sharp. So it has psychological pressure on them when all of a sudden they retire and many people, they feel they lose their sense of identity. Now, I wanted to link it also to pressure on families as well. And the argument is not either or. It's not, young people versus old people. It's actually there is a sandwich generation under pressure. And this is based on evidence we collected in Social Wellbeing Research Center. Now, as you know, Melissa, we discussed this many times, many Malaysians, they even not in EPF. They don't contribute to saving. And those who contribute to EPF, they reach the age of just right before the age of withdrawal at 55. With median saving is about 44,000 ringgit. 44,000, and you would imagine, how much it will last. And you would also link it to increased in life expectancy. When EPF started back in 1950s, life expectancy was around that number, around the 55. Now, if you reach the age 55, you are expected to live another 24 years. Does the 44,000 ringgit can last? No, we know that. So what they do, people in that age, what and we have evidence that they use the money, it takes them to up to 60. By age 65, only 5% they have EPF saving. Then they go to their children, the adult children. On average, Melissa, the adult children, they have to, on average, or people above the age 60, on average, receive 526 ringgit a month from their adult children. Here, one senior citizen. So 2 senior citizens will be 1,000. So 526. It's not a small amount of money for many wage earner in Malaysia. It's actually one-fifth of the median income for that year. Imagine, goes to your old folks. Now, you are sandwiched because you have your own children to take care of. So it's actually this old age or the age of retirement at 60, it puts pressure on the sandwich generation that they need to fill up the gap that their parents did not accumulate enough saving. So it's not really only sustainability, but it's pressure on families.
Right. I mean, that's a good point. And I think that we should probably look at how raising the retirement age affects intergenerational relationship, right? It helped me think this through, because in many Malaysian families, older adults take on caregiving roles as well, vital caregiving roles, like looking after grandchildren, looking after those with, dependents, family members. How might raising the retirement age also affect the intergenerational caregiving patterns, kind of gender roles, family well-being in general? Because, as you said, while it does alleviate some of the pressure of the sandwiched generation, there's also this kind of implicit contract of caregiving duties post-retirement. How do we think that through, Amjad?
That's a very good point. And I think it also has gender dimension. Usually the ones they are involved in the, like providing, whether it's daycare for their grandchildren or support to somebody with disability or health need, usually women. And if you would think about women participation rate in the labor market for that age group, let's say the age 55 or 60 to 64, let's say, if since we talk about increasing the age of retirement, it's actually 20%. So it's quite already, it's low for the age group we're talking about. So in any case, they're not in the labor market. And it's also before that they are low participation rate in the labor market among them. So it's in one hand, it's already they exiting the labor market, which is not good. Most likely, it has to do with also like providing family care and support to those in need. Now, for men, and it's also again coming back to the age of retirement, we're talking about only the formal sector that will be impacted, right? So because this is like who will be impacted by the retirement, because majority, actually 49% of male in age group 60 to 64 already in the labor market, they're not retiring, and this is half. So half of the 49%, those some data, they still participate in the labor market. So this discussion about increasing the age of retirement does not affect half of the population because they already work until 65. So the male and the female likely already out because of family responsibility. We will see some adjustments, so obviously. There wouldn't be one answer that winner losers. It's actually there are many shades to the color for this one.
No, I mean that's a very important point to remember, that the conversation, the public discourse about raising the retirement age excludes half of the kind of working population in the informal sector. But if we were to look at this in terms of the fact that the structure of retirement must soon evolve to match longer, healthier lifespans, what principles do you think ought to guide Malaysia's reform in this space?
It's very important to do it in phased approach. This is very, very important. You don't want to shock the system in any way. 5 years increase all of a sudden, I don't think it's the right thing to do. We just like maybe 1 year every 3 years, that makes sense. So over, let's take 15 years to achieve this. And later on, we create auto mechanism that links it to increase in life expectancy. But at least over 15 years, maybe new entrants to the labor market right away, you don't promise them because they're young, you don't promise them to retire at 60, but rather you say, you entering at age 20 to the labor market, you expect to work until 65. Now, the existing members, I would say 1 year every 3 years. Second principle I very much wanted to highlight this is not with us, not for us. And what I mean by this has to be inclusive dialogue. I'm happy actually to see this discussion online, offline, people talk about it. This is healthy discussion. Many people would disagree with me. That's fine, or agree with me. Or we need this healthy discussion to arrive at the, the consensus or the optimal level of like policy formulation. And that requires to include representatives from the unions, both employer employees, what we call it the tripartite discussion, where the government can, facilitate this discussion. We should trust people to make the good judgment, and let people decide. And I guarantee you, once we have the information, the discussion will arrive at the optimal policy mix.
All right. Can I ask you, for the skeptics out there who had maybe more of a knee-jerk reaction to this proposal and may not be for raising the retirement age, what would you like them to consider? What message would you like to leave them with in terms of how to think this through in a more nuanced way?
You know, like if you look at the $100 bill, what's written on it, "In God we trust." I should add another point to it. Everyone else needs to show us evidence. You know, we need to have evidence, right? And the main objection to increasing the age of retirement is based on assumptions. First assumption is youth unemployment. And this is, we really need to look at other evidence. Let me clarify. There is indeed, in 2017, International Labour Office, they published work that they might be, you know, like can slow job transition for youth people, but in public sector or in very rigid labor market. But public sector in Malaysia is about 10% of the labor force. So it's not that big. This 90% is not public sector. The other evidence to say that, it can cause some youth slowdown in youth employment is in Spain. And that was 2008, if I remember, 2008 to 2013. And at that time, it was the peak of the financial crisis. Youth unemployment reached 60%. Of course, that time, that's not a difficult time. But the majority of evidence that, many economists, they say there is not fixed amount of jobs. If the economy is growing like what we see in Malaysia, and you have a flexible labor market like in Malaysia, there is no evidence. I mean, I can list so many studies. But the second point related to youth unemployment, we really need to be driven by number. If you look at youth unemployment, do some data. The youth unemployment, the highest is the age 15 to 19. This is the age 15 to 19. It goes to, especially male, it goes to 19%. And this is the group, usually they don't work in the public sector. This is the group, Melissa, that are with lower educational attainment. But if you look at the group, so those, they will work in the informal sector, and likely they will not be affected by the increase of age of retirement because of low educational attainment. It means most likely correlated with the informal sector. But if you look at the other group, 25 to 29, usually those, they finish bachelor degree, they look for employment. It's actually unemployment rate among this group, among male, since I compared with male, it's about 2 to 3% unemployment, which is very low. So the youth unemployment concentrated in 15 to 19, the ones with lack of. So it's again like I don't see that argument. Having said that, we need to have this discussion. It's very important everyone to put forward their insights, their criticism, and we should be able to answer and discuss and learn.
Yeah, Amjad, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I appreciate your time. Dr. Amjad Rabi there from UM's Social Wellbeing Research Centre. Wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.